I do want to welcome everyone to the graduate school information session. And we're really glad to have you here. This is something that we try to do every year in late September or early October before the graduate application season is in full swing. And as I suggested before, we're going to be recording this, and we anticipate posting the video recording on the website over the next several days. You may have your video on or off as you please, although if you ask questions, I would ask that you keep your video on while your question is being posed and answered. And when we get to Q&A, you can either ask questions by raising your hand, all the usual Zoom protocol, right? You can raise your hand or you can type a question in the chat, and I'll be sure to monitor that. I'm about to place a link into the sign up, or a link into the chat so you can sign up. And so I'll do that momentarily, and I do hope that you will sign up. So as you may know from the excessive number of emails that you all received about this event, it consists of two panels. One is a faculty panel where we have a faculty member representing all the graduate training areas at Duke, and that is pretty much very similar to the training areas that would be at a lot of universities. And they will introduce themselves and tell you things they think you should know and things that will make your application more impressive. And then we will have a short break, and then graduate students will come aboard and tell their tale. So that's how today is, or tonight is going to work. But if you don't mind, if I could start going through each faculty member and asking for an introduction, that would be wonderful, and then we'll take it from there. So I'm going to go in the order in which people appear on my screen. Dr. Williams, would you mind starting off?
You just want me to tell everybody who I am, or?
Well, right now, I'm wondering if it makes sense to combine a couple things. Actually, I'm glad you asked. So who you are, and then also if there are things about the programs, I'm just wondering if that would be a good thing to kind of add on, the program options that people might have to do the kind of work that you do. So okay. Admitting program and whatever.
Right. So I'm Christina Williams. I'm a neuroscientist. I do research on animals, not on human beings. So I am interested in systems and cellular mechanisms, and sometimes even molecular mechanisms of how behavior works and how the brain works. Most of the students who are interested in neuroscience these days tend to apply to departments of neuroscience, of which there are many across the country these days. There are also something called admitting programs in neuroscience, and those are a little bit different. And what they are is usually an amalgam of all the faculty across the universities who work in the field of neuroscience. And they could be faculty who are in various medical center departments, and even a number of different departments in arts and sciences, like a department like ours, psychology and neuroscience, biology departments, neurobiology departments. But these faculty band together and run one of two types of programs, either a program that admits students but doesn't actually grant a PhD. What happens is in the first couple of years, you rotate into a couple of different labs. If you can find a match with a mentor, and the mentor likes you and you like the mentor, and everything is hunky-dory, you join that person's department. So you then might end up getting a PhD in neurobiology or in psychology or in neuroscience or in biology, depending on what area you ended up in. And there are also PhD granting neuroscience sort of amalgam programs that have their own curriculum that introduce students to the broad field of neuroscience, and you can work with any number of faculty within those different kinds of programs. And many schools, including Duke, have multiple of these programs, meaning you can work with an individual faculty member through their department of psychology, or through their admitting program in neuroscience, or through some large overarching program in behavioral neuroscience or cognitive neuroscience or whatever field of neuroscience you're interested in. Many schools have 2 or 3 different ways to admit students. So, I mean, I can go on and tell you more, but I assume you're going to come back to me at some point. Okay, so I'll leave it right there, and you can ask questions about any of the details of kind of the things that I'm talking about. This is very typical in the field of neuroscience, which is very broad and spans from the most molecular kinds of questions, mostly that biologists are interested in, to the most behavioral kinds of questions. Although in neuroscience, usually those individuals are also doing brain imaging with human beings or working with patient populations, things like that.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. Dr. Hoyle?
Good evening, everyone. I'm Rick Hoyle. I'm trained in social psychology with a concentration in quantitative methods. My own work sits at the interface of social and personality psychology, and specifically sort of leveraging those two subfields. I look at strategies and skills involved in pursuing personal goals, primarily during the developmental period from late adolescence to emerging adulthood. Kind of questions my group addresses are things like what is it about goals that make them more or less likely to be successful guides for behavior, what individual differences account for how people pursue their goals and how successfully they do it, how do habits support and undermine goal pursuit, when do people give up on goals and why. Here at Duke, I function primarily in the social psychology area. Most sort of traditional psychology departments have an area within the department that is rather sort of pure social psychology. I will say, interestingly, social psychology maybe is not unique, but it seems to me to have a distinction of being a nice pairing with almost any other subfield of our discipline. So it isn't uncommon to see people training in social development or social cognition, social neuroscience. So it pairs nicely in the sense that it primarily encompasses the broad set of behavior, cognition, affect that falls outside of what might be considered psychopathological. And as Dr. Williams referred to the sort of breadth of coverage of neuroscience, I would say social psychology is broad in the sense that it goes from kind of in the head experiences related to social life all the way out to people as they function within group context and group problem solving. Over the years I've been in the field, the way we train students has evolved a bit. We very much now follow a mentor model. So students who are looking to do graduate work in social psychology, more often than not, are looking at people rather than programs. Typically, we're organized in vertically integrated labs, that is, labs that include people at all stages of training, from undergrads, even high school students occasionally in my lab, all the way through people in postdoctoral and early faculty positions. Generally, people are taking these days 5 to 6 years to work their way through our program. Increasingly, and this will, I'm sure, be something we talk about as we move along, people come to us not directly out of undergraduate. It's often the case, for example, that they take 1, 2, even 3 gap years during which they engage in some form of ongoing training, sort of with 2 purposes. One is to gain skills that they might not have acquired as an undergrad. The other is to just get a better sense of what it is precisely they want to do and where it makes sense for them to think about doing it. Others come to us probably half the time, in my case, with a master's degree in general psychology from somewhere. So again, they have spent time trying to figure out precisely what they want to do, but also getting some coursework under their belts so that when they hit a PhD program, they're really ready to hit the ground running. Traditionally, we've trained students for careers in academia, all the way from liberal arts teaching kind of positions to Research One universities, but increasingly our students are finding work in industry, and I can say a fair amount about that if you like, or in the nonprofit sector, sort of leveraging the skills that they get as a social psych PhD.
Angie, you're muted.
I can't hear you. For some reason, we can't hear you, Angie.
Can people hear now?
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, sorry for that. I thought my headset had cured itself. Silly me. Dr. Strauman, do you mind taking taking up and talking about
Sure,
in your
sure.
work.
I was trying to read your lips, but I didn't trust my own judgment. Um, Hello, I'm Tim Strauman. I'm a clinical psychologist. My research interests are primarily in the area of the etiology, treatment, and prevention of depression. Just parenthetically, sort of come at clinical psychology from a social psychology lens. So many of the things that Dr. Hoyle was talking about and many of the kinds of questions that he asks in his lab are things that are really important to us too. Um, Clinical psychology traditionally has trained people for a whole range of different kinds of professional roles. The majority of people go into that field because they want to sort of function in patient care, in intervention. Some people want a more traditional research-focused job, like teaching in an arts and sciences college, that sort of thing. Some people are interested in working in a medical center, which generally involves a whole variety of different activities. And there are programs that are sort of well situated to train people to do all of those roles. So in looking for where to train in clinical psychology, knowing of course that it's absurdly competitive, don't let that stop you, but it definitely should inspire you to look closely at what individual programs actually do and what their students tend to do professionally. There usually will be some blend of, is there a suitable mentor there for me? Because it's a PhD degree if you choose that, and you're going to need to do research. But also, where's the program located? Where are the clinical training opportunities? And so on. So I'll have more to say about that in a bit, but thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Marsh.
Okay, hi. I'm still on my phone, so hopefully my phone won't run out of battery. I'm a cognitive psychologist, which broadly, cognitive psychology is the study of how people think, how they see, how they reason, how they use language. I'm a memory researcher. I'm particularly interested in how people acquire, maintain, and update their knowledge about the world with a particular emphasis on false beliefs. So for example, right now, I actually have due tomorrow a grant on using images to debunk myths about COVID-19. So cognitive psychology, our graduates can go into a wide range of jobs. A lot of people go on in academia, but my best friend from graduate school, for example, she works for NASA studying perspective, memory, and pilots, like remembering to do things. Your pilot has to remember to do a lot of things. And one of my most recent graduates went to Facebook because they have a lot of positions for kind of usability and user interface kind of things that they really love cognitive psychology for. So it's kind of, people go to industry, people go to academia, people do teaching. I do want to make a distinction between cog psych and cog neuro. People tend to focus on one versus the other. Some people try to do both, but it's really hard to have all the knowledge to be a neuroimager and also keep up with the cog psych literature. So if you think you really want to use neuroimaging or EEG or those kinds of methods to answer questions about the brain, you should go to cog neuro. And if you're more interested in behavioral things and maybe applications to the world, then you should probably go cog psych. And if you're really interested in decision making, don't forget to look at the business school, because a lot of judgment and decision making work has moved into the business school. So cog psych, there's a lot of different options that you can think about if you're generally interested in these issues.
Thank you. Dr. Wilborn?
Hello, I am Dr. Wilborn, and I am a developmental psychologist. And developmental psychology is more than just studying kids. I always tell my class, like, who would really want to just do that? It's really about the change over time and the mechanisms that drive change. And developmental psychology often is thought of as sort of up to adolescence typically, but then there's human development and lifespan development, which goes all the way into and through gerontology. So it's important for folks to recognize that there's lots of different types of developmental departments. There are lifespan or human development, there are developmental psych, and then some developmental psychology is actually housed in like schools of ed and other sort of applied psychology or applied developmental. So what I look at the relationship between gesture, thought, and language in children, and how culture and socioeconomic status and other sort of external factors play a role in shaping children's learning. I do even look at adults and cultural differences in communicative styles, because it's hard to look at just kids and not think about the influences that in terms of language input and gestural input that kids have from adults and caregivers. And so the study of developmental psychology is really, I think, fundamental in every sort of domain of psychology, because the truth is we all are changing, and we all start as children and we acquire knowledge and have cognitive skills and social skills, emotional skills, and our brain is still developing, and most of your brains are still developing. And so the study of developmental psychology in of itself can really span every aspect of not only psychology, but education, sociology. Most programs have either a mentor model where you go and you apply to a person. There are programmatic, sort of like Michigan is a program where they have an admitting program, and they admit a cohort of people who are a good fit with the cluster of faculty that are there. So in terms of developmental psychology, I just also want to highlight in terms of jobs, I have students who have gone everywhere. And I had someone in my graduate school cohort who worked for Fisher Price, and she did, like, how fun, like she got to literally play with toys and do focus groups with toys and do analyses. And some go into academia, but we also have a good amount that go into policy, education policy, evaluation of programs, interventions, autism, med school, law school. So it's quite the spread. So if you are interested in pursuing or thinking about the developmental route, there's really exciting and lots of different paths. And what drives it is what you're really passionate and excited about. And that can help sort of steer you in the right direction. Is that it? Is that good? Okay.
That's great. Thank you. Thanks to all of you for introducing and kind of laying the groundwork for what's to come. If I could just ask a couple more questions that are general, and then let people start asking their individual questions. I'm wondering what you can tell the people who are watching this about how they can make themselves stand out in a good way to get your attention as a faculty member who's reviewing applications. If you want to.
Yeah, so I don't know if you're going around again, but this is an area that I think is really important to pay attention to when you're thinking about applying to graduate school. So I think Rick mentioned one of the most key features, which is to get lots of research experience. PhD programs are a research program, and faculty are looking for students who have done research, preferably in an area at least close to or related to the area. And so what I mean by that is not necessarily the exact question that you want to pursue in graduate school, but if you want to work with, you work on animal models or do neuroscience, it would be useful that you've had some research experience with animals as opposed to just with human beings or with cells. And so, you know, it's critical that you get research experience, and the more the better. One semester of independent study is not a research experience that graduate school would find particularly impressive. All right, so That's one thing, and I would say it's one of the top things we look for. And maybe you're not aware of this, but really applying to graduate school is in some ways a little bit like applying for a job. So you need to have the credentials that this business is looking for, and one of them is experience, so that we know that this is something you're really excited about. The second thing I would say is, in terms of background, I think the more statistics and the more computer programming skills, data visualization skills that you have, these are skill sets that are broadly applicable across all areas. I'm sure my colleagues would agree with this. And coming to graduate school with having the ability to program, the ability to analyze data in all sorts of ways, any of those kinds of things makes your application stand out. The third thing is letters of recommendation. And it's really, really critical for you to cultivate people who are going to write you letters of recommendation. And presumably these should be people that you've done research with, perhaps people that you've had some, particularly for clinical, I imagine people who've had some experience working with folks that are not like them, working in a homeless shelter or working in other kinds of people-oriented jobs. But it's your responsibility as someone who wants to apply to graduate school and wants to get letters of recommendation to actually talk to these people and tell them what your interests are and get involved in trying to show them and let them understand your excitement, your background, your experience, and that you've done your research to know that you really want to go to graduate school. And last, and I'm sure my colleagues will jump in with even more things, but last on my list is a sense that you have to write a personal statement for graduate school. And this is not a personal statement like the one that you wrote to get into college. We're really interested in you're using that personal statement to tell us why you're a good candidate, not only for graduate school in general, but for our particular graduate school. So writing a really generic personal statement doesn't always apply if you're applying to 6, 7, 8 different graduate programs, each of which has a slightly different specialty area. These are things that are really important to emphasize. If there's several faculty that you're particularly interested in working with, it's a good chance in the personal statement to indicate who you're interested in working with and why you're interested in working with them. This should be essentially a statement of your research experience and background, and essentially showing the faculty that you're applying to that you are a great fit and a great candidate for their particular program and for this area of study for yourself. And I always tell students who are thinking about applying to graduate school to ask themselves, to start out by asking themselves why they want to, what is it that appeals to them? Because it's a long haul. Graduate school is a long haul, 5, 6 years at least. There aren't a lot of rewards along the way. So you have to really be excited about the process, meaning about the research. You have to have some driving passion about wanting to answer some particular kinds of questions. There must be something that you're really wildly, passionately, something that floats your boat. And you have to be someone who's willing to specialize. Graduate school is not an opportunity to gain great breadth of experience. What you become is the world's foremost authority on something. And you have to really want to be someone who dives incredibly deeply into a topic. And so many students want to be generalists. I don't think the PhD is a generalist kind of degree, it's a specialty degree. And so I think those are kind of good questions to ask yourself. Do I want to do this? And do I have the stamina and the focus to actually go to graduate school? If you do, it's a wonderful place. My favorite years were my years in graduate school. The other students were wildly interesting and exciting and became great friends. The faculty were always interesting and exciting, going to talks, going to meetings, being able to present my work and having people talk about it. This was kind of one of the most exciting times of my life. And so I highly recommend it if this is the kind of personality you have and the kind of interest you have. But otherwise, I will pass this on to my colleagues to tell you a little bit more about what's important.
Thanks. Who else would like to register some ideas here?
I just would add, for me, I think partly to echo some of what Dr. Williams just said, but to add a little bit, I want to be confident a student knows what they're in for if they get in. And to some degree, that's why either some gap years or a master's program can be vital, because it's an opportunity to see how, from operating at a fairly high level, how research works. And my suspicion is if some portion of students who do that discover this isn't really what I thought it was, I don't think it's what I want to do. But without that sort of experience, it's hard to know whether a student's going to show up and get involved in the day-to-day activity of research and writing and balancing coursework with research and really like it. Then I think beyond sort of passion matters to me a great deal, but I think maybe I would add to that creativity, this ability to generate ideas that, and not random ideas, but ideas that show some clear investment in some sort of a problem. In fact, I sort of enjoy people who propose ideas and questions that are related to a broad problem to be solved, which means that they may go beyond just social psychology to work with people from other parts of the discipline as well. But and all that basically comes through in the statement and in letters of recommendation. So in a sense, I think what we're both saying is don't underestimate the importance of and the value of those two things.
Thank you. Dr. Marsh?
Oops, I'm sorry. I'm not used to doing this on my phone. I was just going to say that, this is the season when many people write me asking if I'm going to be admitting someone to graduate school. And occasionally I see someone who tells me something really interesting, and that makes me kind of be on the lookout for their application. You want to contact people if only to be able to list it in that spot that says, have you talked to any faculty? Because if you don't list me, there's some chance I might not see your application. So you really want to make sure when you're thinking about it that you're not just trying to stand out to the program, but you're trying to stand out to these individuals. And as Dr. Williams said, that's also where you're going to show it in your essay that you've actually read someone's papers and you know what you're getting into, and this is why your interests are taking you in that direction. So I'm just kind of reiterating, but you can start even before the application to kind of stand out to people that you're really excited about.
Thanks.
Yes. Can I weigh in? Oh,
yes.
Yes, I concur with all of what my colleagues said. A couple things. There's a strategy when you do reach out to a faculty. Short, make sure you attach your vita. A couple sentences about, I've read, a couple of your papers. I think it'd be a great fit. I'm at this school. Here's my vita. I would love an opportunity to meet or chat with you. Recognizing people's time and not putting a hold is it's actually a social sort of norm violation that you don't even know yet, because in our field we just know that if we get this long email from a prospective student, we're like, ugh, but you don't have a chance yet to know that. So that's important. And so have a mentor or a letter writer look at that before you send it to prospective advisors. And if you can have a phone conversation, or if you can, and don't have your feelings hurt if an advisor or someone doesn't respond to you. So some don't respond at all because they don't want to bias. They have different philosophical approaches. Others want to talk to students ahead of time. So there's lots of variability. In terms of letter writers, one of the things that I see often, and this is particularly the case for students of color and student athletes and first generation students, is that they are not as selective in who they ask to be a letter writer. And so one problem is cultivating relationships. And we have to think about that in the context of representation and all those things. So some students who are less representative of the campus may feel it may be harder to make those relationships. But the problem is if you don't, you often will get maybe a letter where someone's like, they got an A in the class, they seemed motivated, they came, they showed up, and those letters, unfortunately, coming from Duke, they actually hurt you. So because we are a top tier school, if you get a letter that basically says you showed up to class, you got an A, you were really sort of invested, you're not going to look any different than any of the other kids at all the other comparable schools. And so you want to stand out. And how you do that is having a letter writer who can speak to not only your potential, but your growth. And you want to be strategic in having different letter writers who can sort of fill in a picture of a different part of you. So maybe an academic advisor and, you know, the types of classes and how you progressed and your strategy, because academic advisors often start with you younger and they kind of see your progression. Also a research mentor for sure. Most students start research too late, and that's important to remember the cycle. So you apply in the fall, and then you would get admitted in the spring, and you'd start the following fall. So if you think about it, the December and the fall of your senior year is when you're going to be applying. If you are just starting a research practicum or you're just starting research, you don't have enough time to establish any sort of rapport or anything with a potential letter writer before that letter would have to go out. And you also don't have enough time to sort of shape your interest. So it's essential to start the research experience the earlier the better. I am an advocate of second semester sophomore year is a great time to start a practicum, and you can move labs. It's not like you have to stay in one place. And your junior year is where you kind of want to anchor into a lab, because that often gives the faculty a full 2 semesters or full, academic year and some change to watch your growth. So who you pick as a letter writer is essential. Also, your statements are huge. Now that we're not focusing mostly on test scores, the statements and the letters are going to be much more heavily weighted. And your statement has to stand out. Please don't do the whole, like, by the time I was 5, I always knew I wanted to be a neuroscientist. No, you didn't. You were figuring out how to tie your shoe. So we all laugh because we all get those. And then the statement's chronological, right? Like I was 7 and then this happened and then I was 12 and then I took this class. And students think that the chronological order is really important. We don't pay attention. I don't care what semester, sophomore year, I don't know what that is when I'm reading it. I would much rather have it be thematically sort of, it can be out of order, but how you came to want to do this may not be about chronologic. It may be about, I had this experience and I hated it. And then I had this experience and I loved it. And then I decided I wanted to try this. And that shows us that you are self-aware. That's the biggest key in a letter, a statement, is that we want to see that you've done more thinking than just, I told everyone when I was a freshman going to college that I was going to get a PhD. So that's what I'm going to do. Because we all know that there's a lot of students who just, that's the path and I'm sticking on it. And grad school will definitely break you of that. So you have to really show that this is something that you've thought about. And we would rather have you take a gap year or 2 to know that this is really what you want, as opposed to going straight through, because it's also expensive. You guys are, grad students are expensive. And so if you're not so sure, the likelihood of you completing it is lower.
Thank you. Dr. Strauman, do you have anything to add?
Oops, I pushed the wrong button. Yes, there is no prize for finishing first. The only thing that matters is if this is what you see yourself wanting to do, if this is your passion, it is a long-term goal. You may have to apply more than once. There's no shame in that. The modal student, certainly in clinical psychology, applies more than once before they even get an interview. You will only become more qualified over time if you put your mind to it. All of the specifics that you're hearing are important. And I think if you add them all together, you can see, this is a process that takes a long time. It takes a lot of investment. But if it's going to give you the kind of satisfaction and fulfillment that you're looking for as a scholar, as a researcher, as an interventionist, as somebody that's going to make a difference in the world, then you want to think about it that way. It's not the same as entering the work world and saying, I'm going to work at a place for a year and then I'm going to move on. And I'm not dissing that. That's a perfectly rational strategy in another sphere. In this sphere, it's a long-term strategy, and you want to think about it that way. And there is no such thing as finishing first. There's no such thing as finishing last. There's just finishing.
Thank you. Great advice. Lots of crossover from one to the other. So how about we go ahead and open up for questions? Feel free to put them in the chat.
So can I also interject something about
Please.
deciding schools? So here's what I will say, I'm sure my colleagues will head nod. I know what I study, and I know my colleagues know what they study. So most applications ask you what other schools you're applying to. So if you write down Princeton, Yale, Harvard, Penn, and I know there's no one at a certain school that does what you're saying you want to do, your strategy is that you're trying to apply like you did for undergrad, the top schools. What I will say is one of the leading researchers in my area is at the University of Delaware. Like, she is one of the biggest names in early word learning. When I see students, I want to look for University of Chicago, University of Delaware. There's certain heavy hitters or people who are working in that area. And if I see those schools, then I know you've done your work and that you have an area you want to specialize in. But if you are just listing the top ranked schools from USA News and World Report and there's not a good fit there, you're already sort of showing that there's a socialization piece that may be missing. So I want you guys to think about the shift from the approach from undergrad to the approach to grad school is really about the work and the people in the area. So if you're reading a paper, who are they citing? Where are they? As opposed to thinking about top ranks of programs. And clinical may be slightly different, but in general, we want to make sure that you're picking and you're thinking about people to work with who are all sort of in a similar area, and they'd be all over the country in terms of schools.
Yeah, I wanted to absolutely second what Makiba said, which is it is incredibly important that you have a sense of what you're interested in studying when you apply to graduate school. You can't, I think one of the biggest mistakes that students make is they write on their application, for instance, they want to work with me and they also want to work with Dr. Hoyle, which sort of suggests to me that they either have no idea what Dr. Hoyle does or they have no idea what I do, because our fields of study are really quite different from one another. And they can't tell me that they're wildly excited about my research and also wildly excited about Dr. Hoyle's research without, unless they have a real great story to tell, which, maybe they do. But the reality is that it usually suggests to me that students don't have any idea what they're interested in studying. And that is really the kiss of death when it comes to applying to graduate school. We want a student who has a good sense. Now, it doesn't have to be an exact, it could be, I'm interested in studying memory and I'm interested in studying it in human beings, preferably in adult human beings, in which case we know that they're probably not applying to a developmental program, probably unless it's some kind of, human long-term development, lifespan development. But, you might be interested in having a bit of a maybe you think maybe I've been interested in neuroscience, but I don't think that's directly, but maybe I want to apply to programs where it's a possibility to get some additional training in that. So, I mean, having a general sense of kind of what the area is that you're wildly excited. Are you interested in decision making? Are you interested in, understanding processes of development? Are you interested in language? Are you in, what is it? What floats your boat? What is the thing that you're really excited about? And I think taking Dr. Hoyle's comments about take your time. Dr. Strawman said this too, figure out what you're interested in before you apply to graduate school. Graduate school is not the time to wander around wondering what you're interested in. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I do want to say that there are these admitting programs and general programs where you get to rotate in a couple of different labs within your first year or so. But that doesn't mean that faculty love it that you do wildly different things in those rotations. You might work with two different people who work on memory in two different ways, or something in that regard. Two people who use some different methodologies that you'd like to learn a little bit more about. Those kinds of rotations are really valuable because it allows you to enhance your skill set, but also hone in on what's really right for you. But you're not going to rotate in graduate school between a social psychologist and a molecular neuroscientist. That's not the kind of rotation you're going to be doing in graduate school. So you need to know what level of analysis you want to study at, and the general kinds of questions that you're interested in asking, rather than applying. Because I think that that's really one of the things that we really look for in an applicant, is that they're honed in on something that they're really excited about, because we're excited about something and we want people in our labs who are also excited. And the last thing I want to say, just to kind of, this has kind of been a theme through everybody's talk, but we haven't addressed it directly. Graduate school generally is a mentorship program, which means that you're applying, maybe you don't join the specific lab for a year or a year and a half, but ultimately you're going to be working with a mentor or with a pair of mentors for the entirety of your graduate career. So you're not applying to the school, the big name school. You're not, as Dr. Wilborn said, you're not applying just to a big general program. You have to have individuals who you are interested in working with, and therefore you should do your homework, look at what papers they've published, maybe write an email to them, a brief email as was described. Try to get a sense of whether this is a good place, a good lab for you, whether their style, whether the ways in which they work is something that's compatible with the ways that you work. So, it's essential to understand that you're not applying to college all over again. This is not, graduate school is not about the courses that you're going to take. It's about the lab and the person and the research that you're going to be doing. It's not, the courses are necessary for you to gain some skills and some background, but it's not the essential focus of graduate school at all. All right, unlike your undergraduate years.
Thanks. We actually have a couple of questions that have come in through the chat. One has to do with getting research experience. So, having applied to multiple labs as a sophomore, couldn't get a spot due to lack of space or grant funding from COVID. And the same happened this year as a junior. What kind of recommendations would you offer to somebody who's having trouble breaking into research in the department?
I do think it's been tough because of the COVID. It's very hard to onboard somebody remotely. And I think graduate schools are going to have to, that's going to be true of a lot of people, first of all. I think though there's three things I personally would recommend. First of all, I always prefer applicants who've worked full-time in a lab post-graduation. They get far more experience working for a year or two full-time than they ever could, in undergrad. And we can talk more about how to get those jobs. But two, given the difficulty of getting a position, I might apply more broadly, because a foot in the door is valuable. So even if you're not sure this is a lab you want to be in permanently, if you get in one and do well, it'll probably be easier to move to another one. Finally, there are things you can do to improve your skill sets that will make you more attractive to labs and help you with your larger goal. So for example, the data visualization people over at the library offer cool workshops. You can take workshops for free on R. Like there's some skill-based things that you could be accumulating that you can also write about in your statement that hopefully will also help you to get into a lab.
You might also, I'm sure maybe you know about Muser, which is the listing of faculty who are interested in looking for students who want to work in their labs across campus. You also might look, and I always recommend to students, look into some summer programs. Now, last summer there wasn't much offered, but a lot of them are gearing up for this year. If you look online, the National Institute of Health has undergraduate programs all over the country. So does NSF, the National Science Foundation. We can help you find connections. Dr. Wilborn runs one of these. I highly recommend looking for summer programs. You can also write if your hometown is Chicago or Boston or something like that. You might look for researchers in that area and write them an email and ask, volunteer or ask if they might have a position in their lab for the summer. These are great ways to get a foot in the door and to get some serious research experience.
Just to piggyback on that, cast the net broadly. Duke's campus has extraordinary people all around. Rick mentioned behavioral scientists in the business school. The medical center, there are probably 50 or 60 psychology PhDs. They're not all clinical, by the way. Many of them are straight research. They don't get easy access to smart Duke undergraduates. And I think if you spend a little bit of time looking at, maybe there's a department that you're interested in, psychiatry, neurology, pediatrics. Look at the people here and look at what they do, and send a cold email and say, I'm an undergraduate, I'm a psychology major, I'm looking for research opportunities. What have you got going? You don't have anything to lose. And I think for a lot of people, they end up finding that they are welcomed in these labs because there's not a steady stream of undergraduates knocking at the door all of the time. So, take advantage of the fact that you're at a world-class university. There's a law school, there's a business school, there's a medical school, there's biomedical engineering. There's so much going on. There are a lot of opportunities here. It's not easy, and sometimes it's right place, right time. But you can make it more likely that you'll succeed just by sending the cold emails out.
Thanks. There's another question in the chat that has to do with, whether it's worth taking a gap year, even if you've gotten good research as you're going along for undergrad. Does it hurt you if you're coming straight from undergrad?
I would love to weigh in on this quickly. It's not really, the research experience is really important. And I also want to echo what Dr. Strauman said, is that don't get caught in thinking that you have to do the research that's exactly, it's ideal, but research is sort of the development of a scholarly scientific identity and a mind and learning the research process. And if you have really quality research experience, let's say you're doing research on sleep in some lab, but you really want to work and do something with, a clinical population. Being able to talk about research skills, the beginning to the end of a project or different tasks, that will help you hit the ground running. And the lab you're going to be in is going to teach you the specifics about how the methods and what they use anyway. And remember, you're going to be reading literature that's focused on your interest. So don't feel like you have to only get research experience that's really directly related to your interests, because you don't. The other important aspect is that it's not really about do you have enough research experience, is that have you let it sort of percolate enough to where you really know what you want and you're fit. I would much rather have a student not rush to the unknown. I would much rather have a student who was a barista in Europe for a year and then talks about how that experience really sort of reaffirmed for them that this is really what they want to do, than for someone to come straight through and not be really sure that this is what's exciting and interesting to them. And so I think it's not really about having to take a gap year. I've mentored, I think I've counted like 165 undergrads since I've been at Duke now. And I will say that probably 5% of those were ready to go straight. They like knew what they wanted. And I really felt that they were advanced enough in their thinking about what they wanted to focus on. Most of them knew general, but they needed a little bit more time to get away from the Duke campus and the grind of the Duke curricula and kind of really figure out what they want. So my advice is there's no one size fit all. It's really about your fit. Fit is key. And if you can find more than one person that would be a good fit for you to work with, that's also going to make you a more appealing candidate, because people leave, or that faculty may not be a good fit for you in temperament and personality. So going to a place where there's at least 2 faculty, ideally 3, would be advantageous for you. That's going to take some research, like looking. You might find the PI that you like their work, but then looking in the department and thinking of other people who are in the department, and then in your statement being able to kind of integrate and say, like, I would love to come work with, Dr. Wilborn and study, early gesture and a cultural lens, but also with Dr. Gaither and thinking about how this changes depending on different contexts and cultural ethnic groups. And with that, Beth Marsh would also be a great committee member, because I want to look at how that affects memory, if we're in certain groups or not, and how those communication styles and stereotype threat may affect our ability to recall information. Man, that sounds pretty good, Beth. We should write that down. But the point is, that shows us that you have thought about and you have this really well-crafted idea of how you can fit in our department and be mentored by multiple people and still finish. That's the key.
Thanks. Other things to offer around what people can do, or when people should start on this work, how they should start?
I usually use this opportunity just to publicly admit to people that most of these things that we're talking about, I did wrong. I did not have good mentorship coming out of undergraduate. I went right from undergraduate to a graduate program. By the time I was done my first semester in the graduate program, I realized it wasn't exactly where I wanted to be. So I stayed long enough to get a master's degree, and then sort of bit the bullet and said, I'm just not ready. I'm not 100% sure. And I actually worked for a drug company, worked on cancer research, and developed my skills in clinical trials and data analysis and statistics. And 3 years later, I was ready. I was older. I was ready to go back to school. I had gotten out of the mindset of worrying about grades and more into it's the work itself. I'm living proof that there's no need to finish first. So I really do, when I talk to individual students, my message is always, this is your pathway. Be thoughtful about it. You'll know when you're ready. Get the opinions of other people who know the process as well. But as long as you're thinking of it as a long-term process, like I said before, you will only become more qualified over time.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I also went straight from undergrad because I didn't even know there was like research jobs existed. And I actually felt at a disadvantage. My classmates were amazing. Half of them had multiple years of full-time research experience and just had, just experiencing, say, 2 different universities before they joined graduate school gave them a depth of perspective. And I worked hard to catch up. But I think it's like, it helps you, and it just makes you so much more appealing, and it makes it much more likely that you're going to get a publication or papers, which in turn are going to make it more likely that you get fellowship money, which in turn also helps you get it.
I also want to highlight that I did a master's. I did not go the route that Dr. Strauman went, which is not uncommon that, someone will go, and then I always tell students, you aren't going to leave here with nothing. So leaving at least with a master's at least marks your time there, because if you don't, then, it's just classwork basically. But I was not ready. I did not do research as an undergrad at all. I love telling this story because I keep thinking that at some point Duke's gonna be like, we're gonna take away hiring you because we thought that you were more advanced. The truth is, I had no idea about what research was. Now, this is not uncommon for first gens and students of color and student athletes. I did a master's program, and the master's program was really incredibly beneficial. I had some of the best mentorship, and I took 150 stats classes. I had a publication on a structural equation modeling chapter, which I actually did work on it, but what? So I had all these really cool experiences, and I needed a little more socialization into what the field was. I had no exposure. So the master's was great for me. I went to a terminal MA program at Cal State Fullerton, and they had some incredible researchers. So I got this great experience. I took 3 years. I took a little bit longer because I was waiting tables and trying to pay for school. One of the negatives about a master's is that it does often mean you might have to take student loans out. And this is where we do see equity gaps, right? So because I took student loans out when I did become a PhD, and at Cornell, my stipend was $13,500 a year. So I had to take more loans out to help pay for. So these are things that I wish, because there was the social mobility gap, no one really talked to me about the financial pieces. So I did take some student loans out, but I also worked while I did my master's, and that allowed me to not take every part of the student loan out. And PhD programs, now it's a red flag if they don't fund you. We would highly recommend you be cautious and not pursue programs that only partially fund you. But it's like a scholarship for like an athlete. Like we're investing in you for the next 5 years. But a master's program, often you have to pay for it. There are some scholarships. You can get TAs, you can do RA-ships, and they're great opportunities. But you have to be strategic in the master's program you pick. This is where you want to pick one of the best master's programs that has some great scholars that you can do some work, and in a 2-year period, get enough skill sets and some experience to where you will now be even more of a top candidate for a PhD. So your strategy for a master's program doesn't have to be fit exactly, but you do want a top program that gives opportunities for their master's students to do research.
Thank you. And actually, this brings us to pretty much the end of the time that we set aside for a faculty panel. And we're so happy that the faculty were able to come and talk and share their perspective about what will make a good application and what will make you stand out. And thank you so much for your time tonight. And people who are attending, please hang around. We're going to take a brief pause while the graduate students filter in, and maybe 5 minutes from now, we'll start up again with them. Thank you.
I just wanted to say that if any of you have further questions and you have specific ones, I'm sure all of us are willing to answer questions via email if something comes to mind over the next number of weeks. So just write us and let us know what your issues are, what your questions are, and we'd be happy to get back in touch.
Yes.
Thank you. Going to start the recording again. So for the graduate student panelists, just to let you know, we are recording this. And so the recording will be available later on. And we're asking that anyone who has questions, turn on their video while they're asking questions and so on. But people have been putting more questions in chat so far. But anyway, welcome. Thank you so much for being agreeable to taking some time out of your night and serving on this panel. Undergraduates who are attending this program and postbacks, if you could just you know that these students represent basically all the training areas that are at Duke. And if we could just start by having each person introduce themselves, that would be wonderful. So Tricia, if you don't mind, I'm going to start with you because you're in the top left of my screen, and then we'll kind of go on, but just say who you are, what training area, what kind of research, and then, you know, kind of we'll talk a little bit more generally, and I'll pose questions to the group for people to chime in as they wish.
Yeah, sure. My name is Tricia. I'm a first year graduate student in PNN, psychology and neuroscience, but my specific focus area is developmental. And I'm working with two advisors, Mike Tomasello and also Tamar Kushner. Anything else? I graduated from Boston University 2 years ago, and then I spent 2 years as a lab manager. So happy to talk about gap year stuff and how to kind of build your CV if you don't have a ton of undergrad research or you don't feel ready to apply. So
Thanks. Jessa.
Yeah, hi everybody. Pretty much the same as Trisha, actually. We work very closely. I'm also a first year PNN student. I work with Mike Tomasello and Tamar Kushner, also a developmental student. I actually graduated undergrad in 2017, and I did Teach for America for a couple of years and worked as a research coordinator. So if you have any questions about stuff like that, I'm also happy to chat.
Thank you. Mercedes?
Hi, everyone. I'm Mercedes. I'm a social psychology PhD student working with Dr. Sarah Gaither and Dr. Cristina Salvador. I do social and developmental psychology, looking at Latino identity and racial ethnic identity. And I actually just graduated from undergrad like 4 months ago. So if anyone has any questions about going straight through from undergrad to grad school, I'm definitely happy to answer any of those. And yeah, I'm really happy to be here.
Thank you. Happy to have all of you here. Raphael.
Hi, my name is Raphael. I am a third-year grad student in cognitive neuroscience. I work with Tobias Egner and John Pearson. My research focuses on human multitasking, attention, and reinforcement learning. I also did a gap year of 2 years. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Julia?
Hi everyone, I'm Julia DeZybis. I am a third year in SINS, so System and Integrative Neuro. I work in Dr. Stacy Bilbo's lab and I study preclinical models. So I work in mice and I think about the ways that the immune system impacts brain development.
Thanks. Allie?
Hi, my name is Allie. I am a fourth year in psychology and neuroscience. My specific area is cognitive neuroscience. I graduated in 2018 from the University of Toronto and then came straight here out of undergrad. And I work with Alison Adcock and Greg Samanas Larkin, and my research is about human memory and how we learn from error.
Great. Kevin, your turn.
Hi, I'm Kevin O'Neill. I'm a fourth year grad student. I'm working with Felipe de Brigard and John Pearson, and I study causal reasoning. I also had a gap year similar to other people, but my gap year was spent at the US Naval Research Lab. And I can also talk about me, Allie, and Raphael all came in through the CNAP program. So even though we're all affiliated with Psychoneuro, we came in through the Cognitive Neuroscience Admitting Program. So we can talk about that too.
Thanks. Dr. Williams talked a little bit about that and the different routes to working with people, even here at Duke. But yeah, certainly people feel free to ask about that. Ethan.
Hi, my name is Ethan. I'm a first year in the clinical concentration in PNN. I work with Ahmad Hariri, Terry Moffat, and Avshalom Caspi using fMRI to study aging. And I graduated from Tufts in 2019 and then worked at the NIH for 2 years before coming here.
Thank you. And Karina.
Hi, my name is Karina. I am a fourth year in the clinical program. I work with Mike Gaffrey. I study stress and brain development and mental health in little kids. And I actually took an extended gap year and actually had a whole different career before coming to graduate school. I worked as a healthcare consultant for the people who make MyChart. So if you're interested in talking about, what it's like to shift gears, I can definitely answer questions about that.
Well, thank you for introducing yourselves. And, before we open up for questions, which again, please feel free to put questions in the chat or raise your hand for those of you who are attending. But if you wouldn't mind chiming in as you would like on kind of what you were looking for in a graduate school, the things that mattered to you as you were scouting out what was available, that would be great. Anyone?
I can start. I say one lesson that I think I learned from being a lab manager, like when I was applying to lab manager jobs as a senior in undergrad, I feel like I was just so committed to research and I really wanted to be in a good lab and all this that I didn't care where I was going. I didn't think about like really anything like cost of living, like the city, would I like living in that city? Would I need a car? That sort of thing. Like I just applied and I accepted a job as soon as I got it because I thought it was a good lab and everything. And then, I ended up in San Diego without a car and in a really expensive city on a lab manager salary. And it was definitely just like a huge shock. And I would still do it. I would like, if I could go back, I would still do it. But I do think I should have it would have been nice to just think about those things. So I guess when I was applying to grad school, I don't know if any of those things really influenced my decision that much, but I at least tried to think of them and keep them in mind because especially for a PhD program, you are if that's what everyone here is considering, it is 5 years long. So you want to make sure it's somewhere you will actually enjoy living.
Thanks. Anyone have anything to add?
I was primarily, oh, sorry, Jessa, you can go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Ellie. Yeah, I was just going to add, just related to what Tricia said. When I was looking for a program, I would explicitly ask the graduate students that were there, because hopefully you get some time without the professor right there, how what the mentoring styles were, and if the grad students were friends, if they actually spent time together, because it was really important to me to be in a collaborative as opposed to a competitive environment, just because I know that's what I need to be successful. So I think asking those questions are really important. Whatever is important to you, I think just go ahead and ask them and not try to be polite the whole time,
Allie?
Just to add to that, and building on what Jessa said, I was really primarily interested in finding a good mentor fit. And for me, that meant a few things. I started with Research Fit by looking for people who were labs that were publishing topics I was interested in. But then I went to my current mentors who I'd been doing research with as an undergrad and said, do you know this person? What's their reputation? Do you know about grad students who come out of their labs? Are they successful? Are they happy? Things like that. And that narrowed down my list quite a lot. And when I did get to the stage where I was interviewing with potential PIs, I was interested in finding out what their mentoring style was. So if I went into their lab, would I be handed a project that's part of a big grant, or would I be given the freedom to explore? Having that freedom was really important to me. And I also wanted to be in a place where it was a collaborative environment where I could work with multiple mentors if I wanted to, because I tend to have eclectic and diverse interests, and I wanted to be able to run free with that. So Duke was a place that checked those boxes for me, but that was something that was on my mind when I was comparing programs.
Thank you. Any other considerations that people had?
Yeah, something that was really, oh, Kevin, you go ahead.
Yeah, this is going to be quick. Sorry. I just wanted to add to what Ali said. When you're looking at lab websites and PIs and seeing what they're researching, make sure you're looking at what they're researching now, currently, very recently, because there are lots of professors out there who change over time. And the most important thing is someone could be known for one topic in research that they did 10, 20, 30 years ago, but that doesn't mean that that's what they're interested in. So if you walk up to this professor and you say, oh, I'm really interested in this work you did 20 years ago, and I want to continue that, they might not be super interested if they're heading in a different direction now. So yeah, just a heads up to just make sure you're looking at publications in the past 2 years, ideally.
Great considerations. Everything you're bringing up is wonderful. Mercedes?
Yeah, so like yes to everything that everyone has said. And I think additionally, when I was looking for programs to apply to, as like an underrepresented minority researcher, the diversity of the department and my mentors was really important to me. So I knew that I wanted to be in a department where I saw grad students that were, that were diverse in various different ways, that had faculty that was diverse, and applying to faculty that I knew I would be comfortable working with. And if I had an issue regarding diversity or an inclusion, that they would be supportive and not dismissive of me. So I was really happy to be able to find, mentors that like both women, both racial ethnic minorities, that were able to provide the supportive environment for me. So I think that it's very fair to be picky about things like that. If you know that you're going to be thriving in environments that are more diverse or have a specific climate, like Jessa was mentioning, those are all very important questions to ask people while you're looking for a grad program. It's okay to ask, how do you think the department has handled diversity and inclusion efforts in the past? How has this mentor handled them? Do you see them taking active steps to promote diversity and inclusion? I think that those really told me a lot about the climate of the department and of the mentor and of the lab. So I think that those are also great ways to get to know a potential mentor and their priorities and see if they align with yours as well.
Thanks for that response. We actually have a question show up in the chat. For those of you who had to apply more than once, what did you do between cycles to strengthen your application?
I can answer that. So I applied to grad school twice. I applied once in 2016, shortly after leaving my job in healthcare. And then I applied again in 2018 when I came to Duke. And what I did to strengthen my application was I had a real lack of research experience when I was applying in 2016. And so I accepted a lab manager position at UNC. And I also tried really hard during that time to be, accruing research skills. And I was able to work with some graduate students and work with the mentor in that lab and be part of a publication. So those were the two things that really strengthened my application in that time period.
Any other responses to that? Ways to bolster application. Jessa?
Yeah, kind of similar to that. I also applied twice. I applied when I finished the Teach for America commitment, and then I applied again this past year. And what I think helped a lot was becoming a research coordinator for 2 years. And it wasn't just that though. I got to see like the technical side of that, but I also had a really good mentor, a graduate student mentor. I was working on her projects, but she also really encouraged me to think about what I wanted to do and had me read relevant papers and join a reading group, join a writing group, and within that space. So I think that really is what got me to make my, research proposal and grad school applications. It made it a lot better for me to speak clearly about what I wanted to do.
Anything else that people haven't addressed yet? Other experiences or training outside?
One quick thing I would say is just if you do take the lab manager out, one thing to be mindful of is like lab managers the positions can be very managerial and logistical, and getting research experience, like being on posters or getting publications, is not part of the job description. And like a lot of that stuff will be pursued after hours. Not to say being a lab manager, I still think the benefits it affords, like you work really closely with the PI, you get really well connected, you meet other PIs usually, and you just get to know a lot of people, you make a lot of connections. And I think that's probably it's very important in academia. So still worth it, but just be prepared to not just be working 9 to 5 probably.
Anything else that is, I don't know if there's other questions from the people who are attending.
I had some thoughts to the first question that I thought. So a lot of things to consider for grad school. So I think a lot of top people talked about mentor fit and research and stuff like that, which is all awesome. And I agree with all of that. Another part of, I mean, being a grad student, there's other obligations that you have, coursework you need to take, and often, and for most anywhere, you'll have to TA. So there's TAing obligations and stuff like that. And so that's also something I considered when I was looking at different places is, what are the TA obligations? What is the course load like? What kinds of classes are available? And there's some places where, it's like you're actually taking lots of courses. Like that's how they train their mentees is through coursework. And then other places are more like, you'll take a handful of classes in maybe your first 2 years, but for the most part, you're here to do research. And so that's another thing that, if you have a preference for that, something to ask about. And same thing with TAing. Pretty much any department will have probably TA requirements. Another thing is funding is very important. So having an understanding about how you'll where the money to pay for you comes from. There's basically three, and there might be more, but three kind of primary ways that grad students are funded. The kind of baseline that's very common is that you basically TA, and that's how you kind of get paid for. And so for those kinds of roles, you'd actually be TAing pretty much the whole time while you're in grad school. Then another option is that you have grant funding from your PI or something like that, in which case you might have a lessened requirement. For Ali, Kevin, and I actually through CNAP. So CNAP actually paid for the first 2 years of our funding. So that was nice. There's also external fellowships, NSF and stuff like that, that I'll let other people talk about as well. But anyways, so some things.
Thank you. Sorry, Raphael, didn't mean to cut you off. Can I get a show of hands for how many people came in with an NSF? Or
I didn't come in with one, but I applied in my first year and got it.
Okay, thanks. So more in the chat about wanting to take Karina up on her offer to talk more about clinical specifically.
Yeah, I was just going to say when I applied to clinical programs, and Ethan, you can feel free to jump in as another clinical person here, but there is a lot that you'll probably read online that's like, oh, you need to get a certain number of sort of clinical hours, and you need to be working with people already before you even apply, and do all the shadowing, stuff like that. I think that doing those kinds of sort of clinical experiences, like shadowing a practicing psychologist or doing peer-to-peer mental health or whatever opportunities that exist like that for you, are great opportunities. And they're, they can be really helpful in establishing if you are interested in being a clinician. But there's a lot of different ways to be a clinical psychologist. So you can get a PhD, which is what me and Ethan are doing. You can get a PsyD, you can get a master's in psychology, you can get a master's of social work, and all those people have to some degree an ability to practice as a clinical as a therapist, basically. And if you're applying to a research PhD for clinical psychology, it's very unlikely that the people that you're applying to are going to be expecting a great deal of clinical hours. So I would say, don't spend a lot of time focusing on that. Just do that to the extent that you know that you would be happy seeing clients and that you feel like you could handle that, but don't, really overdo it. That's my first tip on that one. I see Ethan shared Mitch Prinstein's amazing guide. Mitch is awesome. Superstar Mitch. That's my first kind of tip on that. And I've talked a bunch, so I'm going to be quiet for now and see if people have questions.
Ethan, looks like you're about to say something.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that I agree with everything Karina said. A lot of, maybe it was different a long time ago, but the amount of clinical, actual experience that you have clinically is not a huge emphasis of the admissions process in these programs. So trying to get clinical research experience as much as possible. But even if your research experience isn't necessarily working with the clinical population, or if it's working with a population that's like non-psychiatric, like the most important things is that you have good experience doing research and that the research experience you have will help you do good research when you get into grad school. I would also say, like, really, if you're considering applying to a clinical psych program, it's like pretty much, I've never heard of somebody getting into a clinical psych program without doing a post-bac job. So I would pretty much recommend that you try to do a post-bac job for at least 1 year before applying, just because it's very competitive to get in without having that kind of experience.
If I could interject here and say that we do start getting postings for those kinds of positions. They start rolling in December, and we post them on the website December, January, February, March. So labs from all over the country are looking for people for 1 year stints, sometimes 1 year with an additional one being a possibility. So a lot of our students do go on to do that. Thanks. Other thoughts about, I don't know, just advice relating to clinical specifically, and then maybe we can move in other directions.
I think for me, like the main things that I wish that I had known before I applied that first time was that I really needed more research experience and that I didn't need to worry at all about like accruing clinical hours in advance. I'm trying to think if there's anything else about clinical specifically. I had something, but I can't remember it now. I'll put it in the chat if I remember. Oh, no, I'll put it in the chat.
One other thing to consider is, Karina may have touched on this a little bit, but like you can think about what type of a job you want to have on the other side of doing your PhD, and different programs and definitely different advisors take different approaches to training you on whether, it's going to be really, really heavily research and the clinical training will be secondary to that, or if the clinical training is sort of a primary goal or the primary goal of the program. So websites for departments usually have some kind of information that's like, this is a super research oriented program. Don't apply here if you just want to do full-time clinical work after you graduate. And they mean it when they say that. And then other programs will say, like, we try to balance, or like we have both. And you can get a really good sense of that when you interview, and you can directly ask, and they'll directly talk about this too. But that's something to consider to make sure you're getting the training that you're interested in, when you're in grad school.
Thank you. We've got another question in the chat that's more general. Basically, what are some good tips for writing personal statements?
I have a good tip, which is have people read it, not just you. And I think the most helpful people that read my personal statement were people that had just applied to graduate school. So graduate students that were, people like us that have just gone through it, gave really good feedback for me.
I've done a few years of volunteering to read and help edit the applications of people who are applying to grad school. And the biggest mistake that I see in personal statements is people kind of just regurgitating their CV, that they typically start off with a really sort of bland, generic statement like, oh, I love people and how they work in brains. And that's great and all, but we all do. Everybody applying feels like that. And then they tend to just sort of have a laundry list of everything that they've done, which is already listed on their CV. So my advice is the personal statement is a place to show your character. It's a place to show the passion and direction that you have, and to demonstrate that you have a clear vision of what you want to do and why you think it's important. It's a place to articulate who you want to work with and what you would want to do with them, and to explain details of your past experiences that are not on your CV. So if like a one-liner like lab manager for X doesn't describe, what you learned or what you did after hours while you were in that position, the place to expand on that and like show what you've learned is in the personal statement.
I would just say, I remembered what I was going to say from before also, and this ties in really well into this. But if you have any weaknesses, or not even necessarily weaknesses, but anything that's unusual about your experience, you want to make sure you explain it. So a big mistake that I made the first time I applied in 2016 was I was like, oh, they're not going to care that I worked for Epic. Like, I'll just talk about my research. And then, I got the feedback later that people were like, there's this glaring hole of 2 years in your life. Like, what was that about? And so you want to make sure that all your time is accounted for, even if you think they're not going to care. People are really looking at you as like, they want to know your history and they want to know where you're coming from. And so make sure to explain, your story to the fullest extent.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that just a little bit. I think that's completely right. And one of the best feedback I got was my mentor read my original statement, and it was just pretty much what Angie was saying. It was chronologically, I did this, then I did this, then I did this. And she said that it's okay to move things around and put things in an order that best explains your story and best explains what has motivated you to go here, like what makes it this the thing that you want to be doing. And I didn't want to do that because it felt like I was lying, which is funny because it's still what I did, but just phrasing in a different way to make people best understand why I'm motivated to do this. So that was the best advice I got, was that you were telling a story about yourself and it's okay to take certain liberties with that.
Another question. Does the research that you do as an undergrad or postbac have to align perfectly with what you want to do in grad school?
No, definitely no. At NIH, I studied Klinefelter syndrome in children, and now I study old people. So it's really about like getting research skills. I mean, if it does align perfectly with what you want to study in grad school, that's a big plus. But that's not expected from applicants.
Yeah, just absolutely, definitely not necessary. I worked in a clinical autism lab, and now I don't study anything like that. I will say, so I think like one of the most like important reasons to have previous research experience is it's almost less about like, oh, look how successful I am in the papers I've published, but it's to like demonstrate that you're actually interested in this topic, and for you yourself to actually learn what you're interested in and be able to articulate that, because that's really what's important. And that's what PIs and committees, hiring committees or whatever are looking for, is they want the fit, right? Like, are you going to fit in here? Are your interests aligned with your potential PI and stuff like that? So to that extent, it is useful to like, have done in some way, be able to articulate the way the things that you have done in the past tie in, or, because it's a little weird to be like, hey, I'm here to study memory and I have nothing, I can't explain why, or ways I've seen that in the past and found it interesting. So that's not to say that you need to have done what you want to do in grad school, but you should be able to articulate those interests and maybe demonstrate a way that you've pursued that interest or something like that.
Yes, I agree. I think the only time that it would make sense to be like, I agree. I think it's based more on the skill set. Like if, for example, my undergrad research like was on like children and like social categories, but I wanted to apply to grad school to do like fMRI. I don't even know the first thing about fMRI, or like I've never run an fMRI. I don't know what it is. I don't really understand what's going on. I've never done anything like that before. That's not going to make for like a strong application. So I would just, build the skills. If the research requires skills, make sure that you have them in order to apply, to make sure it's a strong application. Like in the same way, if you've done like wet lab research with mice in your undergrad and all of a sudden you want to apply to social psychology and do like behavioral research on race and gender, you might not have the skill set necessary to do those things. So I think that, oh my goodness, I'm sorry, my cat just grabbed my computer. Sorry, she's making an appearance. And yeah, so I think that that's the only way that your research might have to be a little bit more tied into what you want to do in the future. But that doesn't mean that you can't gain those experiences in like a post-bac or in a master's program or a lab manager position or research assistantship.
To add on to this too, like I think, and to bring it back to the personal statement, like I think part of the personal statement is to kind of just like post hoc explain your trajectory and tell people why you are interested in the things that you want to study, and how all of the stuff you've done before contributes to your interest now in that. And so like, for me, it's like, oh, well, I've never studied the brain before in people. Like I was doing work on computers and artificial intelligence or whatever, but I had never looked at people before. And like, yeah, it seems like a super weird, sharp divergence if you don't frame it in a particular way where it's like, okay, well, maybe what I'm interested in really is just how thinking works. And before I was interested in this aspect of it, but now like for some reason or another, I'm interested in this other aspect of it, which maybe I can get more traction on, or maybe it's just like a hot topic currently. But like, yeah, just to say, like, part of the personal statement is to kind of put your past in a certain way such that it all kind of flows towards where you want to go. And your past doesn't have to already just perfectly line up with that.
Thanks. I'm wondering how you all found, how you all went about looking for the programs. What was your first kind of approach to identifying schools that were ones you eventually applied to?
Lots of Googling and lots of asking people that I respect.
I took a two-pronged approach. First, I looked at individual researchers. So I was reading papers of things that I was interested in, and I took kind of my favorite set of papers and looked up who the PI of the lab was that put out that paper, and then saw like, oh, what school are they at? Are they looking for grad students? Things like that. And then the other prong was going on a school by school basis. So if I like talked to the grad students in the department where I currently was and heard, where they had done research before. And I talked to the professors and found out where they did their grad training. And if they recommended a particular school, then I went and looked through the entire department, found anybody who had keywords for the field that I was interested in, and then just kind of went through their lab websites one by one. I just had a big list, and then I tried to narrow it down from there.
I would like to also add, I had a lot of really great conversations with like the grad students that were like in the department that I was working for at the time. And they connected me with people that they knew from different schools, and just asking like, I'm interested in the development of morality. Who does that? And then people know like general names to look into. And then you can search their lab websites from there, look at their papers, see if that's still the direction they're going in, and things like that.
And I think as scary as it is, sometimes it's best to go up to the head. I found that I tried to create my own list of people and programs I was interested in just based on Googling. And when I went to my PI that I was working for to have a discussion with him about, here's kind of what I was thinking, right off the bat, he was like, oh, you don't want to go there, or you don't want to go there. You should be looking at places like this or like this. Because I think certain programs kind of get reputations, and sometimes those reputations are negative, and they have those reputations for a reason. So it's always good to ask around and use your resources. I think other students are also probably very good resources, but I think also, as much as it sucks, like, connections matter. And if you work for somebody that is good friends with somebody else that does something that you're interested in, it's going to probably make it a lot easier for you to get an interview if they see that name attached to you. So it's another thing to consider as well.
One other resource that I found to be helpful and continue to find to be helpful is Twitter, because professors nowadays love to tweet, and they tweet about their research, but they just tweet about everything. So you don't have to like make an academic Twitter necessarily, but you can like see if these people have Twitter, and they might just post about their life or stuff, and it can give you like a better sense of like the person instead of just looking at their kind of like formal description on the like psych department website or something like that.
To expand this question a little bit to the process of curating that list, I think people have said how you find the first couple options and stuff. We've already talked about some of the things that are really important to look for. One of the big things is whether or not this person that you're finding is even taking students is a really first check that you want to identify, because if they're not, and there is, I will say, there's a bit of a dichotomy between programs. Some programs are what's called direct admit, which is that you are accepted and immediately go into one person's lab, versus other programs have rotations. And so it's more like you show up, but you're not really affiliated anywhere yet. And so that can change a little bit about upfront how much you need to know about who specifically you want to work with. But you do need to have a general idea of like, these are the people whose interests I align up with. And I think one thing that hasn't been said is it's really, really useful to, as you're curating this list and finding people, to reach out to them actually and introduce yourself, and even to ask if they're taking students. That's kind of a hidden secret, I think, that you just apply cold during the application cycle, and it turns out that people have been, calling and Zooming with these faculty for months now, and those often are the ones that get accepted because the faculty are like, oh, I'm looking forward to seeing your application. So that's really one of the first things you should do as you're building this list, is to reach out to these people and just introduce yourself and say, hey. And I like, when I was doing this, that was one of the questions, are you taking students? That was just an easy thing for me to have a reason to email them about, basically. And in the process was able to meet with lots of them.
Another question has rolled in about how many of you had conference presentations, publications, et cetera, before you applied.
So I think this one's very like area specific to psychology. So I all my work so far has been in developmental psychology, and it's really difficult to publish in a timely manner with developmental psychology because recruiting children is really hard. And it's just more time consuming. So I didn't have any publications. I still don't have any publications. So a great way to kind of supplement that in an application is to have conference presentations, posters, symposium, any opportunity you have to present your research. Because really, if you don't have any publications, what people are looking for is that you're doing something with the research that you do, you're presenting it, you're getting it, accepted to conferences, et cetera, et cetera. So the next best thing is those poster presentations and those conference talks, conference posters. But it really depends on the field that you're in. For example, I know a lot of clinical or neuro and, cog neuro people do come in with publications, and it looks weird if you don't have them. But for developmental psychology and social psychology, to an extent, it kind of is unheard of to have one before you're in grad school.
At the time that I applied, I had my first ever paper, a first author paper that was in the publication process, but was not accepted. It was in the revise and resubmit stage, and I was running a follow-up experiment. And at the time I was really worried and kind of upset that I had hoped that it would be out by then. And the fact that it wasn't out, I was like, oh, is it even going to count? Will they care? And it wasn't a problem at all. Instead, people seemed excited to hear that there was anything in the pipeline. What I heard in feedback from multiple people that I interviewed with was that the most important thing they were looking for was that I knew how to tell the narrative of what I did and why, about how it was my idea, why I was interested in it, how I thought of the experiment, what challenges I faced and how I overcame it, and what follow-up questions I had. So I actually think that the most helpful experience is conference presentations. I had a handful of those. Some of them were, low stakes undergrad conferences. And then I had one that was a big conference. It was the Society for Neuroscience conference that year. So I had a variety. Most of them were just little undergrad conferences, local things, but it meant that I had practiced talking about my project over and over again. And I could give a really tight narrative spiel about what the motivation was, what the question was, the design, and what we found. So being able to talk about that quickly and concisely, I think was a really big strength. So conference posters look good and also are probably the best practice you could have for that interview.
Couple of thanks here. Thank you, Jessa, for offering your email template for people who might want to write to faculty members. And I'll probably ask at the end if you're going to allow me to share contact info so people can ask for that directly. And also, Karina, thank you for kind of passing along the observation that if someone doesn't get back to you, it doesn't mean that they are, it doesn't mean that you're rejected immediately. They're very busy people, and so they may not get back on those kinds of questions. And thanks also, Victoria, for asking about Twitter, and also Mercedes for talking about how you have 2 accounts. I don't know if other people also are doing the same kind of thing. So have more of a professional presence in one spot and more personal in the other.
Yeah, I have one account that is my first and last name in the handle and the name. So if you search me, it comes up first. And then another account that is not my name where I tweet like stupid jokes. So if somebody wants to look for me, they're going to find my professional account where I only tweet about like papers and like stuff like that and don't tweet very much. Yeah, but I would recommend having a different one for professional stuff versus regular fun stuff.
Although when you get big, like Mitch Prinstein, you can have an account where you're probably doing both, right?
And an argument in the opposite direction, there are some researchers who post a lot of memes and have a lot of followers who incidentally also see their research.
What other questions do people have? Either people who are attending to get information, or panelists, if there's anything else that we haven't touched on yet that you think would be good, like, the whole, if you could go back, what might you do differently? Or, if only you had known.
One thing that I wish that I had thought about a little more when I was applying was more directly comparing stipends of programs. I kind of assumed that basically they would all be roughly the same no matter what, which is not true. Duke is really good compared to a lot of other places, and one school in particular, I got to the interview, and when I heard what the stipend was, I was like, that's just not financially feasible. So I kind of am wasting my time at this interview, which is annoying. And if I had paid more attention, I might have noticed that and saved myself the application fee to that program. So yeah, it varies a lot. And if that's a constraint for you, I would try and keep that in mind when you're comparing programs.
The one thing I always tell people, because I feel like a popular question is about gap years, is that I know many people who regret not taking a gap year, but I don't know a single person that regrets taking a gap year. So I think talking to people about their experiences with that before you jump to any conclusions about what it means is probably a smart idea.
No other regrets? What about the size of the program cohort? Does that matter?
I think size of lab in particular matters considerably more, or really what space you operate in. That's really a big, and actually that's something I could touch on a little bit, is when you're considering advisors, career stage and lab size are really important in terms of in addition to obviously like their personality, are they a nice person, and those kinds of things, but their career stage and the lab size is going to like very strongly impact your experience as a grad student. So this can range everywhere from, this is a, second year assistant professor and like you're their first grad student, versus like an established, senior distinguished PI with a giant lab with 10 grad students and 10 postdocs where, you never have one-on-one time with them and stuff like that. And so that's something that's really important to find out ahead of time, especially if you have a preference. The best people to ask about that are other grad students in the lab, because they'll have the best sense of kind of their experience with the PI and their relationship in terms of mentorship, in terms of, do they feel like they get enough time with their advisor? Do they feel like they're smothered by their advisor? Different kinds of things. So whatever your concerns are.
Yeah, and just I think some pros and cons between a more senior professor and a more junior professor. I was kind of in a situation where I was trying to choose between, a more senior professor and, more junior professors. I think that there's definitely pros and cons to both. Obviously, a more senior professor can connect you with, their colleagues of like 50 years that they've been working with. And, the big names are always really, really impressive. You say, I'm X, Y, and Z's grad student. That's like really impressive. And that name recognition can unfortunately go a long way. But at the same time, a lot of those professors aren't really publishing as much anymore. They're not really they're not really too concerned with publishing. They have like 200 papers already. At the same time, they're not pushing you to go to conferences or just submit your work, or, they aren't giving talks at conferences anymore. So there may not be as like in the know about how to advance your career right now. Whereas like more junior professors, they are, they were just in your shoes maybe less than 10 years ago. They might have, they might have no more know-how about, how the field's looking right now, and push you, if your professor is going up for tenure soon, they might, put more pressure on you to publish papers. Whether that's a pro or a con is definitely up to you and up to the professor and their style of work. But yeah, I think that that's important to think about. And Rafael's right that I think if I had known from the very beginning that I think I prefer a more junior style of mentorship, I would have, maybe sent in my applications a little bit differently, like Ethan was saying. But I think that it definitely depends on your personality. If you're very self-directed and self-driven, it may not bother you that your professors aren't pushing you as hard, or, encouraging you or passing along these types of opportunities. But it definitely depends on the person and what your personality is like, and where you fit best at.
Yeah, just to add to that a little bit, I think Mercedes pretty much said everything, but I'm actually looking at the questions I had for the graduate students when I was applying. And I think the questions that I got the best answers to were, how is the communication with Dr. So-and-so? Like, are there conflicts, or is there anything you're working on in the relationship? Which sounds like a really personal question, and you can, modify that to your comfort. If you say, like, if you don't want to answer that, that's completely fine. But it seems for the most part, grad students are happy to tell you how that professor tends to communicate, how often they tend to communicate, and what style they do. Asking grad students, are you happy in this lab? And asking if you have a good work-life balance were the three questions I think that spurred the best conversations about what it was really like to work with that person. And I think knowing the answers you're looking for before you talk to them can really help you gauge like who you should be applying to and who you should be maybe shying away from.
One other question that I think I wish I had asked, and I heard other people asking it during interview season, and I kind of learned it along the way, was how long does the faculty mentor take to get back to you? And is that different for feedback on papers than on emails? And you'll get a variety of responses, and it can be very informative about what your life might look like and how quickly you'll be able to publish, or even just be able to get experiments going.
All of this is great advice. Thank you, Allie, for posting that website on comparing cost of living and stipend and all that. That's great. Anything else that people want to know or people want to disseminate?
This might be a little bit dramatic, but something that I really took into consideration when deciding what programs to apply to, or like what programs to ultimately attend, was whether my potential advisor would care about me as a person. So that was really important to me. And I know that sounds like kind of dramatic, but it's important to have that support system, like starting from the top. And don't be afraid to ask grad students those types of questions, or if you see something on Twitter that's like concerning and things like that, don't, I don't know how to say this in English, like don't lie to yourself about something. Like if there are rumors going around or something has a bad reputation for a reason, then like think of those those things. And, you know, a lot of the times we can kind of get bogged down in like, oh, our work and like our supervisors and things like that. But if they don't care about us as people, then, well, at least I knew that I wasn't going to be happy there. So I think my number one piece of advice for people applying is to consider their relationship with their mentor, and like what Jess has said, like know the answers you want out of the questions you're asking before you ask them. So I was looking for every indicator that my potential advisor cared about their grad students as people before they cared about them as students.
Another question in the chat. Oh, sorry. Is there a follow-up on that?
Yeah, just very briefly related to what Mercedes was saying. I just think, like, broadly speaking, it's okay as much as possible to be selfish in this process, because this decision is going to be way more important for your life than for your professor's career. And so if they're pressuring you or like kind of trying to push you a certain way in the decision, that's a red flag, and you should listen to your gut and basically do what you know is going to be best for you, even if it's going against what a potential advisor might be kind of suggesting or implying. With regard to the question about how narrow your interest has to be for clinical psych, you definitely don't. Well, I guess it depends exactly who you're applying to, because there's some people who on their websites are like, I study antisocial behaviors in youth. So if you're not interested in that, don't apply to me. And if they say that on their website, then they probably mean it. But I think most people have a couple of different populations or one sort of general idea of what they're trying to study. And, your interest when you're in grad school should be aligned with what your mentor does. But if you don't have previous experience in that, that's okay. But I think if you don't know exactly what mental disorder you want to study or the age group you want to study, for some advisors, that's okay. But for others, they might have a lot more specified interest or research program. So it kind of depends.
Yeah, I second that as another clinical student. I think the most important thing when you're applying to clinical programs is to just have a continuity in how you tell your story. So if you are applying to a lab that only studies adolescents and you have only studied children, have a reason why you now want to study adolescents. Don't just be applying to be applying, because they get so many applications. I mean, this is true for all the programs, but I think especially true for clinical. They get so many applications and they're looking for a reason to say, okay, well, I'm not going to look at this one. So don't give them that reason. And that would be one of those reasons.
I'm obviously not in clinical because I study mice, but at least when I was applying, I knew I wanted to do kind of one of two things. Like either I wanted to do trauma or I wanted to do development, which sound very different, but I was studying the same cell type. But I applied kind of parallel to programs that represented both because I didn't really know what I wanted. And then once I started to get into the interviews and talk to the PIs that were studying those two different topics, I realized very quickly that I didn't want to do trauma. So I think it's fair to tailor your application pretty specifically to the location or the PIs that you're interested in working to or working with. And even if that means maybe interviewing one place and saying one thing and interviewing another place and saying another thing. Because if you don't know, you don't know, and that's fine, but you don't really want them to know that you don't know. So I think that's a fair option as well.
We're down to our last few minutes. Any last minute questions from the people who are in attendance? Things that you want to know before we're done? Well, while I'm allowing people a little bit of time to type, if they're interested in doing that, panelists, are you all right with me providing contact information so that people can reach out to you if they have questions? So just basically your name and your email address and your area so they remember who's who. Thank you very much for that. That's great. Well, we might be at the end of this thing. I do appreciate panelists, your time and coming and being frank about the process and about the reality and all of that. That's wonderful. Great information for the students who are in attendance, who are, you know, about to embark on this or might in the next couple of years. But and people who have been attending, thank you very much for the questions that you've been posing to the panelists for the last couple of hours, for those of you who've been in and out. It's been great. And I will be planning on disseminating information to the people in attendance probably tomorrow. So some of the things that people threw into the chat as links, I'll try to duplicate all that in an email that I'll send to everybody tomorrow, along with contact information and whatnot. But anyway, really hope that this has been a helpful experience and wish you all the best, whatever you end up deciding to do. Thank you.